Welcome to the Mystery Pathway. Dorothy Forstein was a woman of simple means and quiet strength. Born in 1910, she grew up in a small town, nestled in the heart of America. The town was a close-knit community where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a gentle pace. Dorothy was the eldest of 3 siblings, and from a young age, she took on the role of a caretaker. Life was never easy, but Dorothy faced each challenge with determination. Her parents instilled in her the values of hard work and resilience. She helped her mother with household chores and looked after her younger siblings, always putting their needs before her own. As she grew older, Dorothy's beauty and grace caught the eye of a handsome charmer named Edward. They fell in love and married young, dreaming of a future filled with promise. Together they built a life filled with love and laughter. Edward was a supportive husband, and their bond grew stronger with each passing year. They shared dreams and aspirations, always standing by each other's side. 2 children, Marcy and Thomas, soon followed, filling their home with joy. Dorothy embraced motherhood with open arms, dedicating herself to raising her children with the same values she had learned. Their home was a haven of warmth and love. Dorothy was the heart of their family, a devoted mother and loving wife. She was known for her warm smile, her delicious apple pie, and her unwavering kindness. Her apple pie became a symbol of her love and care, a treat that brought the family together around the kitchen table. Neighbors and friends often spoke of Dorothy's generosity and her ability to make everyone feel welcome. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for Dorothy Forstein. Despite the idyllic life she had built, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Dorothy's life, once so ordinary, was about to take a dark and unexpected turn. The year was 1945, and the world was still reeling from the aftermath of war. The war had left scars on many, and a sense of unease lingered in the air. People were trying to rebuild their lives, but the shadows of the past were never far behind. In this post-war era, the Forstein family tried to find normalcy. Edward worked hard to provide for his family, while Dorothy continued to be the pillar of strength at home. However, the sense of security they once felt was slowly eroding. A sense of unease lingered in the air, a shadow that would soon fall upon Dorothy's doorstep. Little did she know that this year would mark the beginning of a nightmare, one that would haunt her family for generations to come. It all began with a series of strange occurrences. Dorothy started noticing odd things around the house. Objects moved from their usual places, doors left ajar, and an unsettling feeling that she was being watched. At first, she dismissed these incidents as mere coincidences, but as they became more frequent, her anxiety grew. She confided in Edward, who tried to reassure her, but even he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. The Forstein family was about to be thrust into a mystery that would defy explanation. Dorothy's once peaceful life was unraveling, and the nightmare that began in 1945 would leave an indelible mark on their lives forever. The attack happened on a cold December night. The air was frigid, and the streets were eerily quiet, with only the occasional gust of wind rustling the leaves that had long since fallen from the trees. The city seemed to be holding its breath, as if anticipating the horror that was about to unfold. Dorothy was walking home from a late shift at the diner, her thoughts preoccupied with getting dinner on the table for her family. She had worked at the diner for years, and the late shifts were nothing new to her. She was used to the routine, the quiet walk home, and the comforting thought of her family waiting for her. But that night, something felt different. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, a sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake. The streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the sidewalk. Each flicker seemed to make the shadows dance, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Dorothy quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. She pulled her coat tighter around her, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, grabbing Dorothy from behind and dragging her into an alleyway. The attack was swift and brutal, catching her completely off guard. She struggled, but the assailant was too strong. The alleyway, which had always seemed like a shortcut, now felt like a trap. The assailant was brutal, raining down blows that left Dorothy battered and bruised. Each punch and kick felt like a hammer blow, and she could feel her strength ebbing away with each passing second. She tried to scream, but the sound was choked off by the pain and fear that gripped her. Her screams were swallowed by the night. The darkness seemed to absorb the sound. leaving nothing but silence in its wake. It was as if the world had turned its back on her, leaving her to face the horror alone. Dorothy Forstein, Media, Cold and Dark Night Scene, Woman in Pain and Darkness. I remember the cold, the darkness, and the pain. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. The pain was all-consuming, a relentless wave that threatened to drown me. I could feel my consciousness slipping away, and I wondered if I would ever see my family again. She was found hours later, unconscious and clinging to life. A passerby had heard a faint moan and had called the police. When they arrived, they found Dorothy lying in a pool of her own blood, her body broken and battered. The sight was so horrific that even the seasoned officers were taken aback. Her face was swollen, almost unrecognizable. The once familiar features were now a grotesque mask of bruises and cuts. It was hard to believe that this was the same woman who had left the diner just a few hours earlier. Several ribs were broken, and she had deep lacerations on her arms and legs. The police were baffled. There was no apparent motive for the attack, and the brutality of it suggested a level of rage that was hard to comprehend. They combed the area for clues, but there was nothing to go on. There were no witnesses, no leads, and Dorothy's purse was untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. The police interviewed everyone in the vicinity, but no one had seen or heard anything. It was as if the attacker had vanished into thin air. The attacker was never found. Despite the best efforts of the police, the case went cold. The small town was left to grapple with the fear and uncertainty that the attack had brought. People started locking their doors at night, and the once friendly streets now seemed menacing and dangerous. The incident shook the small town to its core, and Dorothy was forever changed. She had always been a strong, independent woman, but the attack had left her a shadow of her former self. She was plagued by nightmares and flashbacks, and the fear that the attacker would come back haunted her every waking moment. The physical wounds eventually healed, but the emotional scars ran deep, leaving her fearful and withdrawn. She found it hard to trust anyone, and the simple act of walking down the street became a source of anxiety. Her family tried to support her, but they too were struggling to come to terms with what had happened. The attack had cast a long shadow over their lives, one that would take years to lift. 4 years passed. 4 long years since that fateful night when Dorothy Forstein was attacked in her own home. The incident had left the small town in a state of shock, and though time had moved on, the scars of that night remained etched in the memories of those who knew her. Life went on, but the memory of the attack lingered like a bad dream. People whispered about it in hushed tones, and every shadow seemed to carry a hint of the fear that had gripped the community. Dorothy had tried to move past it, to rebuild her life and find some semblance of normalcy. Then, on a stormy July night in 1949, Dorothy Forstein vanished. The rain poured down in torrents, drenching the streets and adding to the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. It was a night that would be remembered for its darkness, both literal and metaphorical. It was a Friday, and Dorothy had tucked her children into bed with a kiss, promising to wake them with pancakes in the morning. She had always been a devoted mother, and her children were the center of her world. That night, she had seemed her usual self, tired but content, as she went about her nightly routine. She had seemed her usual self, tired but content. There was nothing to suggest that anything was amiss, nothing to hint at the events that were about to unfold. Her husband Edward was working the night shift at the factory, as he often did, leaving Dorothy alone in the house with their children. Her husband Edward was working the night shift at the factory, as he often did. He had left the house earlier in the evening, unaware that it would be the last time he would see his wife. The factory was a place of noise and activity, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that would soon envelop their home. Neighbor, media, porch of a house in the rain with a mailbox, capturing the moment Dorothy stepped out before vanishing. Around 10 p.m., I saw Dorothy step out onto the porch, maybe to retrieve something from the mailbox. The rain was coming down hard, and she was wearing a coat to shield herself from the downpour. She seemed in a hurry, as if she had forgotten something important. That was the last time I saw her. The image of her standing on the porch, illuminated by the dim light from the house, is etched in my mind. It was as if she had stepped into the darkness and simply disappeared. The street was deserted, and there was no sign of anyone else around. When Edward returned home the next morning, he found the house eerily silent. Dorothy was gone. The children were still asleep, unaware of the turmoil that was about to engulf their lives. Edward called out for his wife, but there was no response. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the usual morning bustle. Her bed was untouched and her coat still hung by the door. It was as if she had never returned from the porch. Edward searched the house frantically, hoping to find some clue, some indication of where she might have gone. But there was nothing. No sign of a struggle, no note, no indication of where she might have gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no note, no indication of where she might have gone. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The police were called, and a search was launched, but there were no leads, no witnesses, nothing to go on. The mystery of Dorothy's disappearance would haunt the town for years to come. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The community was left to grapple with the unanswered questions, the fear, and the uncertainty. Dorothy Forstein's disappearance became a legend, a story told and retold, each time with a sense of unease and a shiver down the spine. The night she disappeared would forever be a dark chapter in the town's history.